Here and Now, the program featuring the news and interests of the African American community. Here's your host, Sandra Bookman.
Coming up, improving the heart health of Black men, how a partnership between Mount Sinai and the Real Dads Network is changing habits and saving lives. Also ahead, Grandpas United, how retired elders are making a difference in the lives of young people. Plus, a closer look at athletes of color breaking barriers and reshaping the world of sports. We're sitting down with the granddaughter of Jackie Robinson, the short film that explores how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used basketball to engage young voters, and Meal Ticket, the documentary chronicling a basketball tradition, the McDonald's All-American Games. That's all ahead on Here and Now. We are taking a closer look at health disparities in the Black community. Today, putting a spotlight on often undiagnosed heart conditions in Black men. A local cardiologist is partnering with Black fathers in an effort to change that and improve health outcomes. Joining us today is Dr. Isilma V. Fergus, the Director of Cardiovascular Disparities with Mount Sinai, along with the founder and CEO of Real Dads Network, Derek Phillips. Thank you both for being with us this afternoon, and welcome back to you,
be here.
Dr. Icy. And I got a feeling, Mr. Phillips, we are going to see you down the road as well.
Yes.
I was curious as to how this partnership evolved. How did it come about?
That's an excellent question. You know, it started out oftentimes, as it does, with a patient referral. So it turns out that Kenyatta, who's not here today, but he's the program chair for Real Dads, is one of my patients at Sinai. And we got to talking, and we were like, how can we make things better in the community for men? And it turns out that where they're located is right across from the hospital. And we just started doing programs and never looked back.
Yeah, perfect partnership.
Yes.
And why, Dr. Icy, which is how most people refer to you, why is this such an important area to focus on, Black men and heart health?
It's so important because Black men have the lowest life expectancy of anyone. And many times it's really due to health, particularly heart health. And as we know, heart health is preventable. And so going into the community, meeting people where they are, talking to them on a level that they can, you know, understand, work with, and try to do something, I think really helps and really lowers the threshold for people to start doing what they need to do to get healthy.
And Derek, I mean, it sounds like just the perfect partnership for members of your organization. I mean, Real Dads really focuses on supporting Black fathers, right?
Yes.
And so when you heard about, you learned from Kenyatta, who we talked about, we're not speaking his name in vain, that he had this doctor and she had this thought about really helping other men pay more attention to their health. You thought immediately, you know what a good idea?
What a great idea, because one of the things we do at Real Dads Network is we stress the importance of fathers being involved and engaged with their children and their families. And the big thing that we say is that in order for you to really be there for your family, you have to actually be here.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we know when it comes to Black men, we tend to be the worst in terms of taking care of our health. So we have a Real Dads Health Initiative. So when Kenyatta brought this to my attention, I'm like, that's perfect. It aligns directly with what we're trying to do in terms of educating men about the importance of taking care of their health, and getting men to understand that in order for you to be that real dad, you have to be selfish. And when I say selfish, is that you can't uplift your family if you don't take care of yourself. So many times men are talking about taking care of everybody else, but we don't take care of ourselves. So we have our cars and that check engine light goes off, we run into the mechanic, right? But when that check engine light goes off in our bodies, we don't go see our doctors. So when Kenyatta brought this initiative with Dr. Icy, I'm like, that is perfectly aligned to what we do. And it was also coming from Dr. Icy's in terms of her perspective, who she's well respected in the community. And a lot of times when we're dealing with men need to feel as though, I need to build trust. So in terms of bringing
build
Real
trust
Dads
with the doctor,
with the provider,
build trust with the provider. So when you have Real Dads Network, we became this great link. So now as you're coming in through a Real Dads Network, and then we're linking with the hospital, Mount Sinai, and Dr. Icy. So that was like a perfect match.
So you're saying to me that because they have trust in Real Dad Networks, when you bring this thought to them and this possibility of working with a provider, they transfer that trust to Dr.
Dr. Icy, and also the work that
Dr.
Dr. Icy has been doing historically in the community as well.
And just a quick question when you mention trust, because we've done interviews in the past where we've talked about particularly black men being mistrustful of doctors, of the system. Did you find that that is the case? Either of you can answer this. I mean, it sounds like it's worked for you because you already had credibility with your members. But do you find that sometimes getting black men to...
I think it's trust, but it's also pride. Sometimes men don't necessarily want to admit what they think it's a weakness, but it's actually a strength to be able to admit that, you know what, I don't feel well, something's not right, let me get checked, let me see what's going on. But then there's the whole trust issue. And you know, historically, many, many eons ago, there were studies and clinical trials where people were taken advantage of, and I think that some of that still reverberates in the community and people talk about it. But I think if you're a provider and you connect with the community, you're able to talk the language, you're able to understand the culture, you're able to go out into the community wherever people are, and people see that you're out there and you're doing these programs, then they're not afraid to come in and see you in the office.
You're meeting them where they are.
Exactly.
So let me ask you, what are there common denominators when we start talking about black men in heart disease? Some of the common denominators, as well as some of the contributing factors to these issues.
Right. So again, I think denial is a big one. So if you're not feeling certain things, so you may not be going in to check very basic things like your blood pressure, like your cholesterol, your blood sugar. That's diabetes, hypertension right there, and high cholesterol. And those are really some of the major risk factors for heart disease. However, there are other conditions that are present more in black men. In fact, 4% or so of the African American male population may have this condition called cardiac amyloidosis. It's not known. It could be silent until it's not. And if you're not checked for it, you may not know about it. Cardiac amyloidosis, it's like a type of protein that gets misfolded. It doesn't work well, and it clogs up the arteries. Things don't work. The muscle of the heart doesn't contract. You can go into heart failure and die and have an irregular heart. There is treatment. And
is it genetic?
It's genetically, it's autosomal dominant, meaning that it can pass from father to son, but it can pass from any parent to anyone. So typically, if you know that someone in the family has it, the child or the offspring should get checked.
Yeah. Yes. And is the percentage of black men that have this condition high? It's
about 4% of the population, but many times the way it starts and the symptoms could mimic other things. So unless you have a high suspicion, sometimes it's missed. And that's why people who recognize that this condition exists, should be involved. And when someone doesn't feel right, a black male not feeling right, should get checked out. We actually brought it to Real Dads because there are different ways you can test. One is a swab in the cheek called a buccal swab.
Which is pretty straightforward.
Which is pretty straightforward, but even if it's not positive and if the suspicion is high, then they can start that connection and the referral is made, they come in and they get checked out.
Okay. Can I ask you, Derek, how have your members responded to this and the feedback you've been getting, because I'm assuming they're involved in conversations about the things how they need to eat, the importance of exercising, but also the important screenings. What's the response been like?
The response has been very positive because one of the things with men is that we know is that when you create a safe space for men, then they're going to show up and they're going to do what they need to do. So one of the things that we do as well is that we've been meeting. We used to meet in person once a month, but COVID came, that changed. We started meeting virtually. We've been meeting virtually every Thursday for 5 years. We have not missed one Thursday. So, and as a result, we're able to have those conversations when men are put in a situation where they feel as though they're safe and they're able to share. So that's how we can talk about issues about men, taking care of your health. Talk about, getting a colon cancer, getting screened for colon cancer. So we've created this safe space where men can talk about being vulnerable. And their vulnerability is not looked upon as a weakness, but your vulnerability is looked upon as a strength. Yeah. So we have one of the dads that, says, Dad said, I would die for my children. So we said, we don't want you to die for your children. Why don't you live for them by taking care of your health?
And before I let you guys go, this program's been running now, this initiative, for about a year.
Yes.
Do you anticipate or hoping that you're going to be able to expand it? Because I know you kind of focused on in the development right across the street from the hospital now and working with Real Dads. Is it something you would like to see in other?
Real Dads has been around and they're taking off, but our involvement from the cardiovascular perspective, I want to see that grow. We did 3 in-person programs where we did screening, blood pressures, the swab I talked about, but the fun one was when we did the Thanksgiving program. We had turkeys, we had fruit baskets, we talked about food, and that was well received, right?
And I think one of the things that we've noticed with men is that you got to use other things to hook them.
To get them,
To get them in. So
we noticed that with women. Women have noticed that too. You got to have something extra.
Yes.
Right. I know. I want to make sure you guys have a good time here as well. I also want to send folks to your individual websites. That's mountsinai.org.
Yes.
And realdadsnetwork.org. This is really an important program. It's kind of a no-brainer. It's so simple, but it's really helping to change some lives and minds. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure.
Much appreciated.
We will be right back. Research shows that spending time with grandparents is beneficial to children and young adults, but not everybody gets the chance to know their grandparents or even reap the benefits of a supportive adult role model. That's where Grandpas United comes in. It's a group of volunteers from all walks of life dedicated to connecting with and mentoring young people. Joining us today are the co-founders of Grandpas United, Frank Williams Jr. and Dr. Jim Eisenberg. So nice to meet you two.
Glad to be here and looking forward to having this conversation.
I think this is just really, the entire idea behind this is just absolutely wonderful. Essentially a grandpa for anybody that feels like they need one. Where did the idea come from? How did you guys decide, there was a need for this kind of group?
Well, Jim and I have known each other for close to 40 years. We're from White Plains, New York, and I'm director of the City of White Plains Youth Bureau, and Jim has been involved with a lot of police work and youth justice work and community involvement. So, and in fact, we're former racquetball players. So we maintain our relationships with school and community issues, and Jim was a grandpa, and you talk a little bit about that, and I became a grandpa, and it took off.
So in 2018, I was a grandpa, and Frank became a grandpa. And I looked around on Google to see if there was anything going on with grandpas. And all I could find, God loved grandmas and grandparents, but nothing for grandpas. And I called Frank, I said, we're involved with all kinds of things with youth. Why don't we think about doing something with grandpas? And we talked to a guy we knew at the local newspaper who was a reporter, and he did a front page story about the idea of grandpas. We had some other grandpas. And the headline was, Gramps, not Grumps.
Okay.
And I hadn't thought of a grumpy. I mean, maybe if you don't get a nap, but we began Grandpas United and linked with the White Plains Youth Bureau with tremendous support from political leaders and others we knew. And Frank was involved with a lot of young people, and here we go.
So you both, the experience of becoming grandpas yourself really made you think more deeply about the role that you could play in young people's lives.
Well, I think for us, and especially for my work, just knowing that so many young people are growing up in homes without a father or grandfather or male figure, and when Jim and I got together and became grandparents, we did some research, and we found that there were hardly any programs in the country that spoke to grandparents being involved, grandfathers being involved with boys and young people. And so that kind of launched this whole initiative that we have in place.
And was it difficult, I guess, first of all, you sort of have the kids almost baked in because you're involved in this youth program. Was it difficult getting people to sign up for the idea to sort of understand what it is exactly that you wanted to do with the program?
I think it was that newspaper article, don't you think, Jim?
That got people first
Yeah.
thinking.
Motivated people, and then I think the others is we began to build a group that we knew of grandpas, a diverse group of grandpas, and they were interested to begin with what could they maybe do with young guys in elementary school that had no father or grandfather in their lives. And Frank, we began to open the door with the schools. The school superintendent said, let's see what we might do. And I think that was the beginning. And I think grandpas were interested also in what they might do in talking with kids about being apprentice or ideas.
And I also want to say that it's also was not just about the young people, it's also about grandfathers, right? Having a place to go, people to be involved with, bringing grandfathers out of spaces of isolation and alienation. And people work 25, 30, 35 years, and what do you do with the next part of your life? And we gave them something to be involved with, something to give back.
And how many grandfathers are involved with your program right now?
So right now we have about 75 in White Plains, and we have programs in Mount Vernon and New Rochelle and Ossining and in Portchester, but we've spoken all over New York State about starting this program. And we've gotten calls from all over the country, from here to California, about starting Grandpas United.
Because the need is the same everywhere.
Exactly.
So I know we're making it sound really simple, and to a certain extent it is, but you have got a long list of programs that help serve your constituency here. Talk to me a little bit about some of those programs.
Tell them about Jumpstart for Dads.
You mentioned before the mentoring in schools, and I guess you do it in community centers, but you've got divergence, where you justice diversion programs.
We do.
So talk to me a little bit about
So at the
some
White
of
Plains Youth Bureau, thanks to the mayor and our city leadership, we provide probably about 60 programs, before school programs, after school programs, mentoring programs, SAT prep programs, employment programs, youth leadership programs, an aviation program. We have a ton of programs. And we have something, art, music, theater, dance, all of that. And then Jim noted that out of Grandpas United, we created another program. It's called Jumpstart for Dads. And we did that because so many fathers don't have the ability to speak to what do I do with my own struggles in life when I'm going through issues of my own challenges, right? And because of that, Dr. Vito, who's helped to start this program, brought this to the Youth Bureau and to Grandpas United, and now it's a program where fathers come together weekly to talk about how to become a better father, a husband, partner, a better person, right? And we've had, close to 40 graduates, Jim?
40 fathers who've graduated.
In 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think 40
Definitely.
years down the road, they'll be sitting where the two of you are, making a difference in some other young person's life.
So in terms of solutions, we look at divorce and separation, and we hear these issues, fathers leaving their families, and we wanted to do something about it. And that's what Jumpstart for Dads came about. Having men be in the spaces where they're talking with each other around marital issues, about child development and raising their sons and daughters, and about money management. And so that's what it does.
Now, can I ask you, since you guys became grandpas and started thinking about the roles of grandpas, did you both have very involved grandfathers in your own lives?
I sadly didn't. And I always felt sad that my own father died young, that he couldn't have been a grandpa. So in many ways, I'm winging it. But
Well, you're doing a pretty good job.
I've learned a lots about what it means to be a grandpa, and really appreciate the role in both my kids and my grandkids' lives, and of course what we're doing with Grandpas United.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a wonderful grandfather. His name was Roosevelt Williams. He was a farmer. He started out, I'm from Mississippi, so he started out as a sharecropper, and from being a sharecropper, he bought 300 acres of land, and he farmed from cotton, you name it, he did it. But he was a role model, the hardest working man I know, from sun up to sundown. And he was a blessing to our family and to our community. So I guess that's where I get my hard work from, listening to his stories and watching him work hard just to grow crops and give back to his family.
And it sounds like both of you are trying to be a blessing in the lives of a lot of young people's lives. And your focus is a lot on young men, correct?
Our focus is on the community.
Okay.
What we're doing is really trying to improve our community, bringing fathers and community members together, helping young people to grow to become productive members of the community, and helping grandfathers who retire knowing that they have something to give back to the community. Jim, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the other recognizing, in addition to what's happening with young men and happening in terms of our mentoring, we're also very attuned to what's happening to grandpas.
Yeah.
So we have some programs for grandpas because I think people are now writing and talking more about loneliness for older people and the need to be engaged. And Frank, fortunately, he's still working. I'm retired. There are some things I miss about working. And so we have a program with grandpas for memoir writing, where grandpas, I'm a Californian originally, got some guys who grew up in the Bronx and Queens, and their stories about being kids there,
They're different from
growing
yours.
up are great. So those kind of sharing memories are great, and we just started a program called the Lunch Bunch, which has like 20, 25 grandpas just bringing their lunch together
And talking.
talking about. I told Frank, one of the three of the grandpas, the opening question was, it's graduation time, right? Did you go to graduation and did you go to the prom? And three guys said, I went out with this girl and we've been married for 50 years now. So a lot of sweet stories from the
It
grandpas.
sounds like Grandpas United is in a lot of ways a full service organization. You're not only doing wonderful things for the young people that you're involved in, but you're also getting these grandpas to share their knowledge, all that, that 65, 70 years of working hard and loving your family teaches you.
People are living longer. So you retire at 65 or 62. What do you do? You might live to be 90. What do you do with the rest of your life? And I think that for Grandpas United, for the city of White Plains, Westchester County, is changing the narrative of men and fathers and grandfathers about life and about the quality of life and about mentoring and intergenerational activities for kids and for the community. So it's a whole different perspective that we have not had before.
I think it's absolutely wonderful. Your website, grandpasunited.org.
That's right.
You can find out more information about the work you do, the wonderful programs you have. And for some reason, I think the next time I talk to you, that long list of programs is going to be even longer.
You're probably right.
Yeah, but that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Thank you both for sitting down with us this
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Grandpas United. You need to take a look at the important work that they're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. We are shining a spotlight on African Americans who have excelled in the world of sports and broken racial barriers. Jackie Robinson leads that list. He became the first African American to play Major League Baseball. In 1947, he started at first base for the then Brooklyn Dodgers. Robinson was what you might call a true agent of change, active in the civil rights movement and a close ally to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It is our pleasure to welcome Jackie Robinson's granddaughter and a board member of the Jackie Robinson Foundation, Sonia Pankey Robinson. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You say the name Jackie Robinson and you can't help but smile and be proud. I did not know, though, about the connection with Dr. King.
Yes.
And maybe that's my ignorance. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So post-baseball, Jackie Robinson obviously became involved in the civil rights movement. And there were many things that were happening in the country at the time that, there was a calling, obviously, to respond to things that were happening in the country. One of the things was, one of the bombings that had taken place in one of the churches, and my grandfather and Martin Luther King came together with that cause in particular, and became friends from there.
How old old were you when you realized who your grandpa was?
Wow. You know, when you grow up with your grandparents, you never realize who they are because he wasn't, you know, he wasn't a sports icon. He was my grandfather. I think when I really realized his fame and the iconic nature of who he was, I think I was probably like a teenager when it really started to hit me.
When you thought about it.
When I really thought about it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Source of pride?
Oh my God.
Even then?
Immense pride because, well, first of all, growing up close to my grandmother, you know, I had heard about my grandfather and what he'd done my entire life. But I think the pride came in when you start to talk to other people and they start to tell their stories about Jackie Robinson, how he impacted their lives, and just the pride they had about who he was.
Now, you're the oldest of 10.
I am the oldest of 10, correct. I am Jackie Jr.'s only child, and I am the eldest of the Robinson family of grandchildren.
Yeah. You're active in the foundation because it's important to you to keep that legacy alive. Talk to me about why that is important.
I'm involved with the foundation because the mission. It was my grandmother's vision to open the Jackie Robinson Foundation, focusing on higher education. It's a way to continue my grandfather's legacy through the next generation and them understanding the importance of education, mentorship, and giving back to society. So for me, at this point in my life and in knowing the importance of that, to stay connected to that, to make sure that the values that we know are important to us are carried through, and also to be connected, to see people and to have real conversations about what he did.
And also, you know, we talk a lot here about how we've moved from our old home, the ABC home on Manhattan's Upper West Side. We moved closer to Lower Manhattan. We're in Soho. We are just down the street from the Jackie Robinson Museum, which, of course, your grandmother, who is a force,
she's a force
of her own. She is now 103.
She's 103, doing well. Still, you know, running the show, but she is doing very well.
And that museum was important to her.
It was her vision. I would say my grandmother is one of the original visionaries, and I think I get my inspiration definitely from her because she was always planning and thinking ahead, and she just had this idea where, you know, you have people come in having these conversations around history, around archives, and storytelling. And that's the perfect place for people to come together, to have conversations that you wouldn't normally have. You have them when you're walking around the floor of the Jackie Robinson Museum.
Yeah, and one of the things that I loved where the kids come in, it's like a story time.
It's story time.
Yeah,
story.
It is,
right? Yeah, you're saying story time.
I'm saying it right.
Yes.
And they come in because literacy is very important to your grandmother. And the museum has made that part of its calling.
Absolutely. And I think story time is important is because you bring these children in and they sit together and they listen and they learn. They learn about who Jackie Robinson was, but they also learn about, you know, being good citizens, and it's an important conversation to have with them.
I want to circle back to something I asked you first when I asked you, when did you know kind of who your when did it become apparent who your grandfather was to the rest of us? What was he like as a grandfather? I mean, to us, he's Jackie Robinson. He's on a pedestal. He's number 42, almost godlike.
Yeah.
But to you, he was like Papa.
He was Grandpa. He was Grandpa. My grandfather lived a short life, as you know.
Sure.
So I only knew him up to a certain point in my early years. But the impact that your grandparents have on you and the memories that you have, I don't have tons of memories, but I have some special ones that are important to me because of the person he was and the grandfather he was. You know, whether it was coming to get me to spend time with them on the weekends, because I certainly spent almost every weekend with my grandparents. Just like larger than life, you know. He's a big guy. Both my grandparents are big guys. But they're so influential in the family because you saw how the family, you know, when you have a strong matriarch, you see it. And you know it and you feel it, but you're a child and you don't understand it. But what we saw was something that was much larger than that I knew.
He carried himself like the man he was.
Like a man he was.
I mean, I think, you know, we say baseball. Of course, he was Rookie of the Year in 1947, 6 World Series, numbers been retired all across Major League Baseball. Started a bank. at
Yeah.
a time when African Americans were not doing that. They couldn't even go into a bank and get what they needed.
Absolutely.
Those are the things that's all part of his legacy, and I think sometimes we forget about all those things, that his activism in the civil rights movement,
That's
which
right.
we've talked about.
That's right.
Do you feel almost compelled? You got to keep those things going
Yes.
in your own way.
Absolutely. I think, what's important is having a relevance of the story for today's consumer market children's society. And I think what we're trying to do is to contemporize it and tell stories in a way that people can relate to. In 53 years and what he did, I say it's a blueprint in many ways, and it's a story that we want told in a different way so that people and children can understand his impact on society.
Yeah, and I suppose not just his impact in society, but also his impact on what their own futures might be, the possibilities.
The possibilities, right, and seeing themselves in him and what can be versus what is.
Yeah. JackieRobinson.org.
Yeah.
That is the foundation.
That is the foundation.
JackieRobinsonMuseum.org. That's the museum. And I suggest that you go to those websites, support both, and please give us our best to your grandmother.
Absolutely, I sure will. Thank you.
You've got those genes, don't you?
Yeah, a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
We will be right back. Stay with us. We're turning our focus to a film that sheds new light on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The documentary short, Hoops, Hopes, and Dreams, tells the story of how Dr. King and his team used the game of basketball to engage young voters.
And I was a point guard for the civil rights movement. Nobody knew about what was going on in the South. And we had to do something about it. But we don't have any money. We don't have much organization. 2 months before we started demonstrating, he said, "Don't you know any folks out there?" I said, "Not really." And he said, "Well, you got 2 months to find some." The only thing we could do was go where the kids were. They were on the basketball court. We'd sit around, ask if we could take the winner. So we're playing, and I bounced past him the ball. And there was a great big old guy, 6'4". Well, Martin goes up to his right, and this big guy is all over him, gonna block him. But Martin, quick as a cat, fakes him to the right, and then Martin had come back to the left and shot with his left. I couldn't believe it. I said, "I didn't know you could shoot with your left hand." He said, "There's a lot you don't know about me."
Hoops, Hopes, and Dreams is distributed by Anscape, a multimedia platform dedicated to telling stories by and for the Black community and owned by our parent company, the Walt Disney Company. Here today to tell us more is one of the project's producers, Alexis Feaster. Thank you so much for sitting down with us this afternoon, Alexis.
Thank you for having me.
This is a project, I'm curious to know what attracted you to it, because it certainly does give us an interesting look at Dr. King's legacy and all the work he did on civil rights.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first thing that attracted me to the film was really the team. I got a phone call from one of our producers, the late Michael Ladd. We called him the point guard of our team. And he did some outreach, and I got introduced to him, and he shared that there's only one person that he heard who had worked for President Obama, but also worked in the basketball world, and was curious I'd be interested in joining him and the director, Glenn Kino, and our other producer, Jesse Williams, and telling this untold story. And for me, it felt like a culmination of all of my life's work. Having previously ran the athlete and celebrity strategy for President Obama, and seeing firsthand how important the game of basketball was and his campaign and uniting our communities. And, so for me to be able to be a part of a project that was so closely tied to my background and work that I've done for so long, it did feel
So I'm curious, have you ever given, considering your background, which is sort of uniquely qualified to be a part of this documentary, have you before given much thought to those sort of connections between Dr. King's work and Mr. Obama's run for president?
It's funny, not using the game of basketball, no. And I think that what made this story so amazing is that no one had heard of it, right? Like we even looked to find archival footage of him actually using the game of basketball or shooting a three-point shot or anything, and it just didn't exist. And so for me, it never crossed my mind to have the game be the connectivity point between the two of them. I did know, of course, that the way that, Barack Obama and Martin Luther King Jr. used strategy and leadership and community to build and to galvanize not just voters, but to galvanize support. I knew that, right? I'm a person who, grew up in Southeast DC and know how important it is to know my history, but I had no idea that the game of basketball tied them together.
And this is essentially what this short film does is put a focus on the intersection of politics and basketball and athletics and activism. Um, and I think what Dr. King was able to do, and I didn't know this either, that he really made an effort to meet people where they are, or where they were, I guess I should say. And I think a lot of us thought, he was in the church, he was doing those marches. But talk a little bit about what we see in the film, him walking
And
onto
we were
those
all
basketball
looking at him
courts and
for a
in
minute
his
'cause he had
suit
on a
and
suit.
balling.
Right. Exactly. In his
He took
floor
off
shine
his coat,
shoes and keeping his tie
didn't
on.
take
And,
off his
I
tie,
think that
and
what we
said,
love,
"Okay,
right?
just get me
And
the
our
ball."
director, I know, is who first heard the story from
I'm
Ambassador
looking at
Andrew
him
Young. And
and
Ambassador Andrew
that's
Young was
true.
at a gala and just kind of
But he
telling
was
it
a young
flippantly,
man.
like, explaining that him and Dr. King used to hoop and they used to go out to the courts and go into the communities. And I think, the beautiful thing is that when you grow up and you're taught about Dr. King, it's kind of like, oh, he goes out and he marches on Selma and he goes out and he's, just getting people to follow him. Of course, that can't be true, right? It can't be that that's the only way that he went into a community and said, hey, everybody, let's go. There was a strategy behind that. And I think that, Hoops, Hopes, and Dreams tells the story that it wasn't just him, it was
On the
his
court
whole crew,
and
right? He
on
has a
through the
whole,
civil
all
rights
of his,
movement.
we call him his homies, right? His civil rights leader, the other people that were with
I
him. And I
always
remember, Ambassador
thought of
Andrew Young
myself
telling the
as a
story how he
politician.
gave them the charge.
I
He said,
mean,
you've got 2 months to go
that
out
my
and find some
job
people that we can
was
connect
to get
with.
the
The barrier to entry, to play basketball is so low, right? You can see it, poured at the end of your neighborhood, at the end of your block. You can play it in your driveway. People without hoop can just shoot the ball in the air. There's so much about the game that brings unity and teens and allows you to see people like just as yourselves. And so I think the fact that Dr. King was doing that back in the 50s and the 60s and getting his friends and getting himself to go out to the court and say, let's meet young people where they are so that they can see themselves in us. I mean, that's what we need right now. We want us to be able to see ourselves in leaders.
And really, two things. Dr. King could actually really play ball.
Right.
He wasn't just fronting, he could really play. And I think that I would think that, and I should be asking this question instead of stating what I think, but the fact that you are able to show that to young people who are just learning about his legacy, and instead of seeing him as this icon sitting up on a stone pedestal, you humanize him, and it also reminds all of us of just how young that they all were. I mean, he was assassinated at 39. They were all so young when they were leading this movement that changed America.
Absolutely. And it's, one of the other things that, you saying that reminds me of something that his daughter, Dr. Bernice King, was sharing with us in our conversations with her. She said her father was just a man. He's just a man. So we see him as this grand figure, which of course he is in history, but he was just a man who had a calling. He didn't know that this is going to be what his legacy was going to end up to be. But it reminds us all that we can all make a difference in our own ways. We might not all end up being Dr. Martin Luther King. We might not end up being the, President Barack Obama, but who are we in our communities? How can we show up and bring our full selves in the environments that we are in? What are the ways that we can tap into our relatability with each other and the joy that, something like the game of basketball brings? And I feel like, hearing the story and sharing the story with young kids about Dr. King playing basketball allows them to get excited about his legacy. we have so much history erased right now. We have so much misinformation being shared. And for us to be able to tell a story that now my nieces are going to have this as part of his legacy. Young people in schools are going to have this as part of his legacy. That's just something that is so powerful.
Quick question for you, because you worked for President Obama. Was he aware of that basketball connection at the time, or was he just doing what seemed to come natural to him on his journey?
Yeah. To my knowledge, she wasn't. It's not something that ever came up in our conversations or ever came up in the way that we were using the game of basketball as a strategic play. But with President Obama, it was his love. He has a passion for the game. So, that one side of it came naturally to him. But where I came in and where, others on the team came in is I ran the athlete and celebrity strategy along with, many of and collaborators. But the way that we used that was, for an example, you have NBA players who aren't wearing helmets like football players. They're, folks follow. And so my job was to empower them and say, your voice matters. Even if you don't think your vote matters, your voice matters. And there's a responsibility to be able to share your voice as a basketball player, as an athlete. And so President Obama was able to use the game of basketball to draw that connection with other athletes. And then those athletes were able to help then go on the campaign trail and promote, all the great things that President Obama was doing.
And just a quick question before I let you go. The use of animation to tell this story, was that important to you in effectively engaging the audience?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, our director, Glenn Kino, and Pearl Urek, who is our amazing animator, it came up originally because there was no footage. And so you tell a story and not have anything to show for. People want to see a picture, people want to see a video, and we didn't have that. And so it first came to be that how do we actually recreate the fact that Dr. King did play basketball? And Krill is a big basketball fan and wanted it to look as realistic as possible. And so I think that what we were able to do and doing animation obviously is something that connects to young people, but it also I think tells the story, and it always gets the most laughs and the most engagement. Watching Dr. King, do his layups and shoot, go to the left, all thing that I think brings joy to people.
Because as you said earlier, it does remind people that he was simply a man who did extraordinary things. Alexis Pfister, thank you so much for sitting down with us this afternoon. Hoops, Hopes, and Dreams. It's a remarkable short film. You need to take a moment to take a look at it. It is now on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+. Thanks again for being with us.
Thank you. You have a good day.
We'll be right back. A new Prime Video documentary, Meal Ticket, chronicles a basketball tradition, the McDonald's All-American Games, which showcases elite high school players. It's the same court where legends like Michael Jordan, Shaquille O'Neal, and Kobe Bryant, just to name a few, proved they got game.
I don't care what any player ever accomplishes. They could be a champion and a Hall of Famer. But when they talk about things that they accomplished in their basketball career, everybody's going to mention being a McDonald's High School All-American.
If I play my cards right, I'll be looking at my...
This really is my one way out. Without basketball, I wouldn't be where I am right now.
The #1 event to evaluate kids pre-draft is the McDonald's All-American Games.
If you shine in the McDonald's All-American Game, there was a path to the NBA.
Joining us now are the co-directors of Meal Ticket, Corey Colvin and Carlton Gerard Sabbs. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon.
Great pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
I'm going to put this question to both of you so you can answer either way you want. What led you to this project? I know you guys work as a team. Why was this a project that you wanted to work on?
Corey, you can go.
All right. So yeah, like you said, working as a team, Carlton and I started our production company in 2018. And, we worked our way up doing commercials. Well, started music videos, commercials, editorial, and we got into short form. But then we had this amazing opportunity come our way to be considered to direct our first feature-length film. And as we learned more about it, we found out that it was about telling the history of the McDonald's All-American, which was amazing because when you think about how long it game been going on. No one's ever told this story before. So when it came our way from some guys who mentor us by the name of Hootie and Chike, a record duo, we just got really excited about it, and we started production pretty much immediately.
Yeah, it's always nice to work on a project that gets you excited. Let me ask you, Carlton, are you a big basketball fan? So was this project right in your wheelhouse?
Absolutely. You know, I didn't play growing up because I wasn't that good in Chicago, but sports fanatic since I was a little kid, and I've always followed the game. Actually went to one in like 2011. So when the story came across our desk to give us the opportunity to actually, you know, film this and tell this 45-plus-year story, I mean, it was a dream come through. Because it's a lot of pressure for one, so the challenge was exciting to take on. But then you just think about, we were very confident in our voice as storytellers that we would be able to bring it, like to manage the integrity of the culture in it, shine some light on some people that maybe haven't and should be more, you know, put on a higher platform. And it's been a great opportunity. So it's been an amazing film.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans are going to be waiting to see this, excited to see this film. Let me ask you, Corey, the name, Meal Ticket.
Yeah, so when Carlton and I were talking about it, we had, you know, we started to put our list together, and it was just something when we landed on Meal Ticket, how it checked so many boxes, no pun intended, but it was like when you're growing up as a kid, you think about going to McDonald's and getting a Happy Meal, you know, or McDonald's and just ordering your favorite meal. And then it's like, you know, from us being music fans and like hip hop culture, there was always that term, like, you know, somebody's meal ticket, you know, a skill set, a gift that they have to be able to, you know, lack of a better word, hustle your way up out of a situation. And, you know, when you think about it, that the side of these are kids who play in the game. These are 17, 18-year-old seniors in high school. And, you know, this is their meal ticket. That's kind of like how we landed on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's quite apropos. Let me ask you, Carlton, you know, look, we mentioned some of the names, Kobe, Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing, LeBron James, and you just mentioned a few minutes ago that there are some folks that you believe you highlight in your film that probably aren't getting the, you know, getting the press, the credit maybe that they deserve. Talk to me a little bit about some of those stars that you, that we talk about, that we see talked about in the film, that you think deserve a little bit more of the spotlight than perhaps they're getting these days.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there's players that were legends in their time. Maybe you really haven't seen them in certain films, like, you know, Dominique Wilkins, Alonzo Mourning, you know, Chris Mullin. You know, these are nostalgic names and figures. But I think most importantly, the founder of the game is something that Corey and I discovered in the process of working on the film, where he was just a sports promoter out of D.C. that no one knew about, but he started this game. He first started off as the D.C. versus the World as the Capital City Classic, and then McDonald's catches wind. They come on as a sponsor, and then he finds out about this coach Morgan Wooten and the legendary John Wooden from UCLA. And he put them in the forefront, and they were basically the faces of the game, but behind the scenes, he was the founder. And for the game lasted beyond him, you know, it's 50 years now, and no one knows who he is. And Corey and I, as we worked on this story and bringing it to life, we were like, if anything comes out of this, if this guy gets, you know, into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, it would be an accomplishment.
Yeah, it sounds great, and it's wonderful to work on the project where you're actually shining a spotlight on something that most people, like you said, probably didn't even know. Can I ask you, Corey, are there any spectacular moment from the McDonald's All-American game that you highlight in your film that you can tell us about?
Yeah, it's actually a lot.
I know. So you got to pick one or two.
Like one or two, but like Carlton and I telling the story, it was something that we were met with. Like he said, the game's been going on for 50 years, and trying to condense all of that history down to where we are with the 95-minute runtime. But there's so many big moments. Like you have Michael Jordan, who was able to hit a game-winning shot before he actually did it when he made it at North Carolina in the championship. And then you have Shaquille O'Neal, like the Shaquille O'Neal coast-to-coast moment where people were just like, that was their first time seeing a big guy move the way that he moved up and down that court.
And there are so many wonderful moments when you're watching these players. And I think if both of you could just sum up for me why this game is still so important when it comes to basketball, and especially for these young players. I mean, look, these days, the word starts to get out early, on spectacular players. But why is this still such an important game for these youngsters?
I'll say it. For one, it's a rite of passage for these players still because of the legends that have been a part of it. And if you want to become a legend, this is the first mark in your career that you have to basically live up to the standards of Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Candace Parker, right? But also when you think of the numbers of it, right? It's 200,000 seniors in America, okay? And then it gets broken down to like 100 of them letters to become a McDonald's All-American. So they're saying, we're watching you for your senior year. And then that number gets broken down to 24. So out of 200,000, you're the final 24. And that it means it's the biggest stage. Everybody has done it. And I feel like kids personally still do it to this day because people they looked up to did it.
Yep, and it's still, you kind of know you got to be among the best of the best. I'm so excited for the two of you because I know it's a big project, one of your first full-length film. Meal Ticket is streaming exclusively now on Prime Video. It is definitely worth the watch. Carlton, Corey, thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck. I suspect we are going to see more of you too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back. Thank you for joining us on Here and Now. If you missed any portion of today's show, you can watch at abc7ny.com/here and now or listen to our podcast wherever you subscribe. If you'd like to comment or share your story, email us at hereandnow@wabc.com or follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'm Sandra Bookman. Enjoy the rest of your day.